The note was 43 words long. I counted them the first time I heard them, standing in my kitchen in Tucson, Arizona, holding a dish towel I had forgotten I was holding. 43 words, spoken in a flat, even voice from the back seat of my truck, by a 9-year-old girl who had not spoken a single word of her own in almost 2 years. I counted them again. Then I sat down on the floor because my legs stopped working. My name is Gerald Voss. I'm 63 years old. I am a retired electrician. I live in a 3-bedroom house on the east side of Tucson that I have owned for 22 years, and I am the grandfather of the most remarkable child I have ever met in my life. Her name is Ellie. She was diagnosed with autism at age 3, and for the last 6 years, she has been the center of everything I consider important. Let me tell you what happened. Ellie was born to my son Marcus and his then-wife Diane in the spring of 2015. She was small, serious, and from the very beginning, she looked at the world differently than other children. She did not babble the way babies do. She was quiet in a way that filled a room rather than emptying it. By the time she was 2, she had memorized every book on her shelf. By the time she was 3, she could recite the entire periodic table of elements, but she could not tell you she was hungry or that her shoe was too tight or that something had frightened her. The diagnosis did not come as a shock to me. It came as an explanation. My granddaughter was not broken. She was wired differently, and once I understood how, I made it my business to understand her language. Ellie communicated in patterns, in repetition. She had what her early therapist called hyperlexia, an extraordinary ability to read and absorb text far beyond her years, and she had something else, something the specialists described more carefully, a kind of audio memory so precise that she could replay conversations she had heard, sometimes days later, sometimes weeks, in perfect, verbatim detail. Word for word, tone for tone, like a recording playing back through her small body. Her mother Diane never quite accepted this. She came from a family that valued presentation, that saw anything outside of the expected as inconvenient at best and shameful at worst. Her mother, a woman named Vivienne, who wore expensive jewelry and said very little that was not cutting, referred to Ellie once at a family dinner as a burden that Marcus had not bargained for. I excused myself from the table before I said something I could not take back. Marcus tried. He loved his daughter fiercely and completely, the way I had tried to love him fiercely and completely. But his marriage was hollowing out from the inside long before either of them admitted it. By 2021, they were living parallel lives in the same house. By 2022, Diane had filed for divorce. The custody arrangement that followed was, in my opinion, designed to minimize Marcus rather than protect Ellie. Diane's family had money and connections and a lawyer who knew how to make a devoted father sound like an absent one. Marcus worked construction, long hours, sometimes overnight on commercial jobs. The schedule was used against him. Primary custody went to Diane. Marcus got every other weekend and 1 weeknight per month. I got even less on paper, but Diane was not interested in spending time with Ellie herself, so, in practice, I had my granddaughter every Saturday that Marcus had her, and sometimes longer when Diane needed to travel or simply did not want to be bothered. Then Diane started seeing a man named Preston Garr. I met him once, briefly, at a pickup when I came to get Ellie for the weekend. He was standing in Diane's driveway with a coffee mug and the particular kind of ease that some men have when they are comfortable in a space they did not earn. He looked at me the way certain people look at old men, like I was furniture that had been there too long and nobody had gotten around to moving yet. He did not offer to shake my hand. Ellie was standing beside him on the driveway, staring at the ground, and when I reached for her, she came to me faster than she usually moved. I noted that. I filed it away. Over the following months, I noticed other things. Ellie rocking more than usual when I picked her up. Ellie eating less at dinner. Ellie, who sometimes smiled at the trees outside my window or the pattern of shadows on the kitchen floor, not smiling at anything for weeks at a stretch. I raised it with Marcus. He raised it with Diane. Diane said Ellie was going through an adjustment period. Normal, she said. Children adapt. But Ellie was not adapting. She was shrinking. Then came the Saturday in October. I had picked Ellie up that morning, and we had spent the day the way we usually did, quietly and without agenda. She helped me water the garden, which she enjoyed not for any social reason but because she liked the sound of water on leaves. We ate grilled cheese sandwiches at the kitchen table. She read for 2 hours without moving. On the drive back that evening, she was in the back seat behind me, and I had the radio on low, some country station that I was not really listening to. She started speaking, not to me. Ellie almost never spoke directly to anyone anymore. She spoke the way she sometimes did when something was pressing on her, when a memory needed to come out, like a valve releasing pressure. Flat effect, steady pace, no pauses. I almost did not hear it over the radio. I turned the volume down. She was saying, in a voice that was not quite her own, a voice pitched slightly higher and clipped at the edges like someone who had grown up somewhere with money. It does not matter what he signs or does not sign. Once it processes, there is nothing he can do about it. The fund transfers automatically. The girl never has to know. She doesn't understand these things anyway. She barely understands anything. Then a different voice. Lower, male, with a kind of flat confidence I recognized immediately. Preston's voice. And the old man? Back to the first voice. Vivienne. Gerald is 63 years old and retired. What is he going to do? Then a third voice. Diane. Quieter. Like she was standing farther away, or like she already knew she was going to regret being in the room. What if Marcus finds out before it clears? Preston again. He won't. It's done in the next 72 hours. Stop worrying. And then Ellie fell silent. Just like that. She was looking out the window at the streetlights going by, her hands folded in her lap, her face entirely still. I pulled into a gas station 3 blocks from home and sat there with the engine running for a long time. My granddaughter had just played back a conversation she had heard, perhaps days before. Perhaps that same morning. A conversation about a fund transfer, about documents, about Marcus not finding out in time, about Ellie herself being dismissed as a child who would never understand anything. I had no idea what fund they were talking about. I did not know what documents had been signed or not signed. I did not know who had authorization over what. But I knew what I had heard, and I knew who had said it. There is a thing that happens to you at 63 that does not happen the same way when you are 30. You stop second-guessing yourself. 40 years of work and family and paying attention have a way of calibrating something in you so that when you hear the truth, you know it is the truth and you do not waste time talking yourself out of it. I knew what I had heard. I knew what it meant. I called Marcus from the gas station parking lot. He did not believe me. I want to be honest about that. Not because he thought I was lying, but because believing me meant believing something about Diane that he was not ready to believe, even now, even after the divorce. He said Ellie had probably overheard something on television. He said she sometimes replayed things from podcasts or audiobooks without any context. He said I should not jump to conclusions. I told him what I knew about his daughter's audio memory. He knew it as well as I did. I told him to listen to me carefully. I told him there was a trust fund. His voice went quiet on the other end of the phone. Marcus had not known about the trust fund either. Not fully. Not until his grandmother, my late mother-in-law Ruth, had passed 2 years earlier and left a portion of her estate specifically designated for Ellie's care and education. $41,000, placed in a custodial account with Diane as the named manager until Ellie turned 21. Marcus had been told it was handled, that the lawyers had arranged everything, that he did not need to worry about it. He had not looked at the paperwork closely. He had been drowning in the divorce. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Marcus said, "I need to call the estate attorney." The estate attorney did not have good news. It took her 3 days to untangle what had happened. 3 days of Marcus and I sitting with almost no information while she made calls and pulled documents and sent certified letters. When she finally called Marcus back, she had a very measured, professional voice that did not change pitch, not even when she said that Diane, using her status as custodian, had initiated a transfer of the majority of the trust fund to an account that appeared to have been established in a false name, and that the transfer was structured to clear in a way that would be difficult but not impossible to reverse if caught in time. Difficult, but not impossible. Marcus called the police that evening. The first officer we spoke to was thorough and well-meaning, but he was honest with us about the limitations of what a local department could do with financial fraud involving a trust. He took a full statement. He noted Ellie's account of the conversation. And here I want to say something about that moment, because it was the first time I had to watch someone else try to decide whether to believe my granddaughter. The officer was not dismissive, but I saw the calculation in his face. A 9-year-old with autism, nonverbal, who had spoken a conversation she had allegedly overheard. He asked me, carefully, whether I was certain she had not been prompted, whether someone might have suggested these words to her, whether I understood that children sometimes repeat things they do not fully comprehend. I told him I understood exactly what he was asking, and that my granddaughter had a documented audio memory that had been observed and recorded by 3 separate specialists over 6 years, and that if he would like to speak to her current developmental pediatrician, I had the number on my phone. He took the number. 2 days later, Marcus and I were sitting in the office of Dr. Nora Whitfield, a child psychologist at the University of Arizona who specialized in autism spectrum disorders and had been Ellie's evaluating clinician for the past 2 years. She had agreed to speak with us because Marcus had explained the situation and because she knew Ellie well enough to understand what we were describing. She listened to my account of what Ellie had said in the truck. She asked questions, careful and specific. Then she asked if Ellie could be brought in. We brought her in the following morning. Dr. Whitfield sat with Ellie in a room that was softly lit and arranged with quiet things, books and textured objects, and a low table with paper and pencils. I watched through a window. For the first 20 minutes, Ellie did not speak at all. She arranged the pencils by color. She turned the pages of a book without reading it. Then Dr. Whitfield said something I could not hear, something low and careful, and Ellie went still. And then she spoke. Not to Dr. Whitfield, not exactly. She spoke to the middle distance, the way she sometimes did, and what came out of her was not 43 words, but something longer, something that had been waiting longer. She replayed the conversation from the truck, and then she replayed others. A conversation from a kitchen she described by its smell, a conversation from a car. A conversation that had apparently happened at night when Ellie was supposed to be asleep but was lying awake in the way she sometimes did, listening to everything. Dr. Whitfield had a legal pad on her knee and she was writing without looking down. When it was over, she came out of the room and found me and Marcus in the hallway. She was a composed woman, someone who had spent decades in rooms with children carrying things that adults had put on them, but her expression was different now, contained but different. She said she wanted to bring in a colleague, a man named Dr. James Okafor, who had published work on what he called episodic verbal recall in high-support autistic individuals and who had, on several occasions, provided expert evaluation in legal cases involving children on the spectrum. She used the word legal. She said it plainly, like she had already made up her mind. Dr. Okafor arrived within the hour. He was a tall man, calm and unhurried, who sat with Ellie for 40 minutes and then came out and told us something that made the back of my neck go cold. He said that based on his evaluation and Dr. Whitfield's notes, Ellie's recall was consistent with what he had documented in a small number of exceptional cases, that she was not interpreting what she had heard, not paraphrasing, not confabulating, she was replaying, and that the legal evidentiary standard for this kind of testimony was a complicated and evolving area, but one that had precedent, and that, in his professional opinion, what Ellie had provided constituted a credible account of conversations she had directly witnessed. He looked at me when he said the next part. He said that among the conversations Ellie had recalled, there were references not only to the trust fund, but to a secondary account, to documents that had apparently been signed in Marcus's name without Marcus's knowledge, and to a comment from Preston Garr, spoken in the kitchen of Diane's house on a Tuesday evening 8 days prior, in which he had said, "And I am not going to forget these words for as long as I live, that if the old man ever figures it out, he won't be able to prove anything because the girl is the only witness, and nobody takes her word for anything. Nobody takes her word for anything." That was the sentence that undid me, not with grief, with something colder and more focused. I had spent 6 years learning my granddaughter's language, learning to sit in silence with her, learning to read her face and her hands and her patterns, learning what she needed and how she moved through the world. I had learned all of it because she was worth learning, because she was a full person and not an inconvenience. And some man standing in a kitchen in Tucson had looked at her and decided she was a gap in the record, a blind spot, a witness who would never count. He was wrong. We went to the FBI field office in Phoenix 3 days later. Marcus had already been in contact with his estate attorney, who had managed to flag the transfer and delay the final clearance, which meant the money had not yet left. The attorney had also discovered, in the course of her review, that 2 other documents had been filed using Marcus's signature, including an amendment to a property deed that had not been disclosed during the divorce proceedings. The case had grown. Special Agent Diane Ferris, which was briefly confusing given the names involved, was professional and unimpressed by the complexity of it, in the way that agents who have seen a great deal of financial fraud are unimpressed by financial fraud. She listened to everything. She reviewed the documentation, she had a colleague speak with Dr. Okafor by phone, and then she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said that in her experience, financial crimes of this kind almost always relied on the same assumption, that somebody in the family was not paying attention. She looked at me when she said it, the way Dr. Okafor had looked at me, and I understood what she was not saying, which was that the assumption had been wrong, and that the wrong assumption was the thing that had unraveled everything. The investigation took 6 weeks. I am not going to pretend those 6 weeks were easy, because they were not. Marcus barely slept. I barely slept. Ellie came and stayed with me for 3 of those weeks because a family court emergency order had temporarily suspended Diane's primary custody pending the investigation, and those 3 weeks, cooking with my granddaughter and watching her arrange my bookshelf and listening to her replay an audio documentary about migratory birds at 2 in the afternoon, for reasons only she understood, those 3 weeks I hold differently than most of what has happened in my 63 years. One evening near the end of the 3rd week, Ellie and I were sitting on the back porch after dinner. She was not looking at me. She rarely looked directly at people, but she was facing in my direction, and her hands were loose in her lap, which for Ellie is a kind of ease. She said, "You are the one who listens." Just that. Flat delivery, no inflection. She may have been replaying something she had heard, or she may not have been. With Ellie, that line is not always clear, and I have learned over the years that it does not always need to be. I said, "I try to be." She did not respond. She went back to looking at the yard. But something in the way she was sitting shifted just slightly, the way a held breath releases. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning in November. Preston Garr was taken into custody at a gym in Scottsdale, where he apparently spent his mornings. Vivienne was arrested at her home in Paradise Valley, where officers found a file cabinet containing documents that the FBI later described, in court, as unusually comprehensive evidence of a fraud operation that had been in planning for nearly 18 months. Diane was arrested at her house, the one she had shared with Marcus, the one where Ellie had grown up. Ellie was with me when it happened. She did not know. I did not tell her that morning. She had a routine on Thursdays that involved sorting a collection of smooth stones she kept in a wooden box, and I watched her sort them and thought about what I was going to say when the time came. The charges were serious. Wire fraud, forgery of legal documents, misappropriation of a minor's trust funds, conspiracy. For Preston, additionally, a charge related to the manner in which he had spoken to and around Ellie in ways that the DA's office classified under a statute relating to emotional abuse of a minor. Marcus got full custody in the family court proceeding that followed. The judge was a woman in her 50s who had read Dr. Okafor's report in full and asked several pointed questions about Ellie's school placement and daily routine and the documented history of her care. When the order was read, Marcus put his hand over his face for a moment, the way men do when they are trying to hold something in that is not going to be held in, and I looked at the table because it felt like it belonged to him. The trials took the better part of a year. I am not going to walk through all of them in detail, because the truth is that the legal proceedings were the least important part of what happened. They were consequences. The important part had already happened in the back seat of my truck on an October evening, 43 words spoken in a flat voice by a child that two people had looked at and decided would never be a problem. Preston Garr was convicted on all counts. 14 years, federal sentence, to be followed by a period of supervised release. Vivienne entered a plea arrangement partway through her trial when it became clear that the physical evidence in her file cabinet was going to make a defense difficult to sustain. 11 years. She was 71. She sat very straight when the sentence was read, which was the most I could say for her. Diane's trial was the one I attended. Marcus did not ask me to, but he did not ask me not to, and I sat in the gallery for 4 days and watched the proceedings with the kind of attention I had learned to pay to things that mattered. She was convicted on 3 counts and acquitted on 1. 8 years. When the verdict was read, she looked across the courtroom. Not at Marcus. At me. I am not sure what she expected to see. I kept my face still and held her gaze until the officers moved. And then it was over. The drive home took 40 minutes. I stopped at a grocery store and bought the ingredients for the soup that Ellie had told me, through a pointing system we had developed over years of Saturday afternoons, was her preference when things felt uncertain. Butternut squash. A particular kind of noodle. Nothing complicated. Ellie was at the house with Marcus when I got home. She was in the back room with her stones and her books, operating in her own orbit, which was where she was most herself. Marcus was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he was not drinking, staring at the surface of the table like there was something written there. I put the groceries down. I made the soup. We did not talk about the verdict, or the sentencing, or any of it until much later, and even then, not very much. Some things do not need to be narrated. They just need to be survived. Ellie moved into Marcus's new apartment in January, a place with a bedroom she helped furnish by pointing carefully at items in a catalog, which is a form of conversation if you know how to listen. She started at a new school in February, a program designed around the specific and varied ways that autistic children learn, one that did not require her to perform her understanding in ways that did not come naturally to her. The first week, she came home and reproduced the entire morning's activities in sequential order, which was how I knew she had been paying attention to everything, as she always had been. She came to my house every Saturday. Some Saturdays we talked, in the way that Ellie and I talk, which involves her playing back things she has heard and me responding to them as though they are direct address, because sometimes they are, and sometimes we sit in the garden in the particular quiet that exists between two people who do not need to fill every silence. I have learned to love that quiet. At 63, I think it is one of the better things I have learned. One afternoon in late spring, we were sitting on the back porch and Ellie was looking at the yard, and she said, without preamble, she thought I didn't understand. She did not identify who. She did not need to. I said, I know. I understood everything, she said. I know you did, I said. She turned her face toward me. Not quite direct eye contact, but closer than she usually came, and she held that position for a moment, which is the thing she does sometimes that I have come to understand as her version of meeting my gaze. Then she looked back at the yard. I sat with her and thought about the word that Dr. Okafor had used when he described her recall. Exceptional. He had said it as a clinical term, which was appropriate, but I had been turning it over ever since, holding it up to the light. Exceptional. As though what she had was a surplus of something, rather than a deficit of the things people expected. As though she was not less than what the world had tried to make her, but more, precisely because of what they had tried to take from her. She had been in that room, and they had talked over her and around her and about her, and she had listened to all of it and held it in perfect order, and when the time came, she had given it back. Nobody takes her word for anything. I thought about Preston Garr in a federal facility in Arizona, 14 years ahead of him, and I thought about how the thing he had counted on, the thing he had been so certain of, had been the thing that undid him. He had been wrong about my granddaughter. He had been wrong about what she understood, what she was capable of, what she would one day say out loud in a carefully lit room while a specialist wrote everything down without looking away. He had been wrong about me too. I am 63 years old. I am a retired electrician. I am a grandfather. I live in a house in Tucson, Arizona, and every Saturday morning I make 2 plates of eggs and I leave one on the low table near the back window where the light comes in, because that is where Ellie sits, and she will eat if it is there without being asked, and she will not eat if it isn't, and I learned this about her 7 years ago and I have not forgotten it. That is what I have. Not cases or verdicts or the satisfaction of watching someone be led out of a courtroom. I have Saturday mornings. I have a child who knows she is known. I have the back porch in May, when the yard smells like warm dirt, and the shadows are long and the silence is the good kind, the kind that does not need anything from you. Last week, Ellie sat down beside me on the porch steps, and she said, in her even, unhurried voice, "You are the one who listens." She had said it before. She says it sometimes, and I do not know if she is replaying something or saying something or both. With Ellie, as I said, the line is not always the point. I said, "I will always listen." She nodded, one small definitive nod, the way she does when a thing has been confirmed to her satisfaction. Then she picked up her book and went inside, and I sat there in the afternoon light, thinking about how 43 words spoken in the back of a truck had pulled back a curtain on everything that had been hiding underneath it. Pay attention to the quiet ones. Pay attention to the ones that people have decided are not worth listening to. You do not know what they are carrying. You do not know what they have heard, or how long they have been holding it, waiting for someone to finally turn down the radio and lean in. If you have someone in your life like that, if you have ever been someone like that, I hope you know that your words count. I hope you know that someone, somewhere, is writing down every single one. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every one of them. If this meant something to you, hit like. It takes 1 second. And if you want more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, subscribe and hit that bell. We post every week. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.